Hello friends, this is video number 4 in our study of 1 Peter, and today we're looking at a few passages in chapter 1 and verse 22 through chapter 2 and verse 10. Before we drill down into a few of those verses in that particular passage, I want us to get the lay of the land in general. Give us a bird's eye view, if you please. Now, we know that in chapter 1, verses 3 through 12, Peter is enumerating the wonderful blessings that we enjoy because we are followers of Jesus and because we are in His family. And they are wonderful blessings, aren't they? Then we find this word therefore in verse 13 of chapter 1. And now what Peter is going to do is he's going to offer a series of exhortations that are based upon those blessings in the early part of chapter 1. So because we've been so blessed, we need to do certain things. We need to live in a certain way. Well, how are we to live? Let's go first of all to chapter 1 and verse 22, where Peter tells his readers that they need to love each other deeply from the heart. Love your brothers and sisters deeply from the heart. Now, verse 22 is interesting. Peter points out in that verse that we have been purified by our obedience to the truth, but to what end? To a mutual brotherly love. And the word that he uses there for love is phileo, or philia. That is affection that Christians have for other Christians. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? That we have been purified. Our souls have been purified by what? By obeying the truth. But to what end? To what result? To an affection for one another. To a family feeling for one another. Then Peter says, based upon that, you need to love each other deeply from the heart. And that word for love is the stronger word, agape, agapao. You need to love each other deeply from the heart. That's a stronger word, of course, than phileo. This word for love is, well, it's an intelligent kind of love. It's a love that recognizes the worth of its object, has a concern for its object, and has the best interests at heart for its object. This is the way we should feel toward one another, Peter says. We should look out for each other's best interests. We should have a heartfelt love for one another. The second exhortation I want us to notice is in chapter 2 and verse 1, where Peter writes, "Rid yourselves, therefore, of all malice and all guile, insincerity, envy, and all slander." The word that he uses here for rid yourselves is translated elsewhere as, well, take off, as one would take off clothing. Take off these things now that you are a follower of Jesus. Take off all malice, that is, ill will, that you may feel toward one another. Take off all guile, that is, all kinds of deceit. That should not be part of your life. Take off insincerity, take off envy or jealousy, and take off slander. That would be talk that defames others. You notice here that Peter is trying to emphasize the importance of the family of God and how they need to get along with each other, especially during times of suffering and persecution, how they should love each other deeply, and how these attitudes should not characterize their behavior at all. Chapter 2, verse 1. The third exhortation I want us to notice is found in verse 2, where Peter says, like newborn infants, I want you to long for the pure spiritual milk. In other words, he says, I want you to develop the appetite that infants often demonstrate. We should have the appetite for the Word of God that infants have for their mother's milk. We should be like David in the Old Testament, who said, in your word I meditate day and night. On your word I meditate day and night. My delight is in your law. Do we have that kind of appetite for the Word of God? Well, Peter says if we do have that appetite for the Word of God, it will lead to our spiritual growth. And then he says we should have that kind of appetite since we have tasted the goodness of the Lord, the last part of verse 3. Well, it's all of verse 3, isn't it? It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of since. Since you've tasted the goodness of the Lord, you need to have an appetite for the Word of God. And then the fourth exhortation I want us to notice is found in verses 9 and 10. I know I'm skipping over a lot of wonderful material, but that's just the way it has to be. Peter tells his readers and tells us who we are and why we are what we are, what we should be about. He says, you, in contrast to those who disobey and who stumble as a result. By the way, they were destined not to disobey, they were destined to stumble because they disobeyed. That's verse 8. Now, in contrast, you're not like those people. He says, you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people. Now, he's using phrases that are found in the Old Testament to describe Israel. And he says, now those phrases apply to you as well. Gentile believers, Jewish believers in Jesus Christ. These phrases describe you. This is who you are. And aren't we honored to be described in these ways? A chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own possession, God's own people. In order that, now, Peter's going to tell us the purpose for what we are. Because we are what we are, this is how we should live. This is what we should do. We are what we are in order that we might proclaim the mighty acts of Him who called us out of darkness into His marvelous light. And what a great statement that is, right? I mean, we are who we are so that we will declare to the world, proclaim to the world, how great is our God. The amazing, wonderful, unbelievable, marvelous deeds of Him who called us out of darkness into His marvelous light. After all, he says, once we were not a people at all, but now we're God's people. Once we had not received mercy, but now we have received mercy. And of course, the exhortation there in that passage for all of us is to be about that work of proclamation. The message of Jesus needs to be on our lips, doesn't it? Why? Because of who we are and because of how blessed we are. Well, I'm sure that's enough for today, and probably more than enough for today. I'll see you next time, and again, thank you for being with me through this study of 1st and 2nd Peter. God bless you.